look at that for information coming up throughout next year. I'm getting goofy things popping up on my screen every once in a while here. Rather, I don't know what that means. Okay.
Don't know what kind of goofy things.
A lot going on in this chart, but it's the income forecast, and boy, what a jump above what we were in 2019 and above the average. For the most part, really kind of been a pretty good year, or could turn out to be a good year for many in the farming. And this is national, so you know, we'll have those areas that maybe ended up too dry or too wet and too dry in the same year. And so not an individual deal, but on a national level, the net cash farm income, our gold line or yellowish line there, is the highest level since 2014. And as you can see, as we come across here, and that's at 134.1 billion in a nation. It's 22.5% above average, and the average has been 109 for net cash farm income for the 20 years of 2000 through 2019. And so it was a 22 or almost 23% increase over last year as we move from 2019 to 2020. Then looking at net farm income, it's the highest it's been since 2013. So if we go at 119.6, and in 2013, it was quite a bit higher, close to that 134. 32% above its average, and a 43 or almost 44% increase over 2019. So as a nation, our farm economy or income has done well this year, and that's needed. You know, a lot of tight positions, a lot of working capital positions really being strained. There was, you know, a lot of worry of bankruptcies taking place, and I think the rise in prices and the aid of government help, and also the better weather, better planting conditions, better growing conditions for the most part throughout has helped. The livestock probably down as a whole in price, but also maybe quantity is made up for some of that. Just the same thing, just recapping it. So our net cash farm income highest since 2014, and net farm income since 2013. They increased both by 25 to 36 billion, and you know, a 22% increase on the net cash farm income and 43% on net farm income, and well above the average that it has been for the last 20 years. Now, taking a look at government payments, and this chart is from ERS, and I have it summarized here over to the side. So we had a 107% increase over 2019. It increased 24 billion. So here we were right at 22 or so in 2019, and we've moved up to that mid 40 range. Most of that is the supplemental and ad hoc disaster payments. It was 32.4 billion for 2020, or estimated at that, and most is from the Coronavirus Food Assistance Program and the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. So we had 2 rounds of coronavirus food assistance program. One came in, the first one at 11 billion and the second one at 13.3. So a total of 24.3 billion added up there. And then the PPP, which part of that's loan, and for right now, that's being considered as income. As that changes and they find out what part won't be forgiven and becomes loan, that will be switched in the estimates. So that's how that's being handled in these estimates right now. The MFP, or Market Facilitation Program, was what was authorized in 2019 and then paid in 2020. So that dropped off quite a bit from what it was in 2019, a 10.5 billion decrease from 2019. And then our farm program payments that are the function of price. Remember, they had the opportunity to sign up for 2 years in our new farm program. So ARC Ag Risk Coverage Program had an increase of almost half a billion over 2019, and many switched for those first 2 years to a price loss coverage program, or the PLC, and that increased over 3.1 billion over 2020. And then also a little bit for the dairy margin coverage program. So those would be the payments that are a function of price. Conservation payments, as we see, stayed pretty steady. Not much change in those. Well, it doesn't want to go to my next slide for some reason. There we go. So, with decent yields and some better prices, I think our outlook is optimistic, but we probably need to use a good dose of caution, because our working capital really got depleted the last 3 to 4 years, and we producers and individuals need to probably build that back to provide that cushion and that safety net for themselves too. I just did South Dakota numbers. Our net farm income for South Dakota is in 2019 was almost 27% of gross. So that's a pretty good net. But government payments were 10.4% of gross, and that's a large percentage. So that equates to our government payment or assistance being 38% of net farm income, or very close to 38% of net farm income. And that won't be around as much if as we go forward. So, or it may not be. As we start to get healed up and things get going, we'll have to go back to the market and rely on the market. And so hopefully market will do that. It's providing, I feel, some opportunities right now for guys to start looking at next year's sales and look at locking in some input prices if they haven't already, and also probably start to do some, at least looking at some forward sales and seeing what that does for bottom line. Just a review of our crop budgets that are as a tool that we do have available online. Much better outlook, I would say, than what we have had the past few years. And a lot of that is due to increased price and anticipation of decent yields or an ability to fully plant. Here's just the comparison. Now, this was just in budgets, and I think the big thing that I wanted to see, we showed this last month, but I wanted to see was in budgeting in the fall before the crop year, it's much better outlook this year than it has been the last couple. So I think there are going to be some opportunities this year, and we hope for the best for this next year. Okay, switching back to the ERS and just to look at our balance sheet a little bit on the U.S. farm level. So our top line is total assets, and of course, with lower interest rates, asset values continue to increase, which mostly is made up of land. And with the low interest rates have incurred optimism, I guess, in the land market, and that helps support those values. Total debt has increased a little bit, but not as fast as our asset value. So equity is held pretty strong. Also, then that new debt that is being added, as we can see possibly from this graph, much of it is coming in as real estate debt. So either financing new purchases or refinancing debt to land. So just wanted to show the growth in that and how it has been the last few years. And really that makes sense. As we had those tight margin years, people were probably doing some refinancing and adding it on to real estate that had been purchased very reasonable and maybe been paid for. The solvency ratio is right at 14% debt to asset, still in a pretty strong position as a nation and a farm economy. So it is creeped up the last few years some, but still in really a pretty good position. This is probably still the concern. Our liquidity ratio, or our current, actually what I'm showing here is working capital to gross revenue. And we probably like to see that at 25 to 30%. And that is really just having a hard time staying above 20 since 2015. So we definitely want to try and get it to 20, and 25 to 30 puts a better position. Now, I would say this would be some of the reasoning, or some of the reason that we've seen that increase in longer term debt use is to help shore up liquidity and make that better for people. But the tight margins have put the squeeze on our current ratio, and if we do have a profitable year, I would encourage people to use that money to build that working capital back, get inventories more paid for, and be in a stronger position. Switching a little bit, this is 2019, just somewhat of a summary of the local region. I take this data from FinBin, which is at University of Minnesota, and it would be farms that are reporting to that with their farm income, and then summarized in FinBin, the database. So it's Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska are the farms or the states that I used, and I picked on 2,000 to 5,000 acre crop farms. As a crop farm, they just have to have no more than 20% of income comes from livestock. So most of the income in these farms that I've chosen here is from crop production. So just kind of a summary of how they fell out. These profitability groups are on net income. So low 20%, upper 20, which would be 60 to 80, and then the high 20, 80 to 100, the top end. Not a lot of difference in the total crop acres operated. The upper end owned a little more of that as a percentage. Machinery investment a little higher on the lower end, but about even on the other two. Yields were better for the higher profit group, for the higher net profit group. And also their selling prices were, I'm trying to get my mouse to show up here, were also a little bit better. I think the big ones to watch, or for individual operations to watch, are kind of that asset turnover level. They're turning over at close to 30%, but also then the operating profit margin, it was really good at 20, and the operating expense ratio, which is total operating expenses divided by gross sales. And out of that operating expense, they take out depreciation and interest. So it's total operating expense less depreciation and interest. And we've always kind of used 70 as a benchmark, try and keep that below 70. And you see the upper is right at 72 and the high income is just under 70. So they were able to achieve that on those operations. The other one that looking at is a change in earned net worth. So if we are, that's at 9%. I like to think of this using that rule of 72. So if we went, the rule of 72 says that using a compounding, divide the interest rate or return into 72, and that would be the number of years that it would take to double the operation. So on that high end, they could double in 8 years using a 9%. Yeah, don't know why it doesn't want to move for me. Okay. I think we do have opportunities for profit. I think we need to know our costs and lock in if favorable, and watch those price risk opportunities and take advantage of them. I think our virus is still a very strong unknown, and until we get vaccinations throughout our nation and we keep moving, I think we still have issues that could arise from that. Part of that on the grain side may be if we have to slow down more this winter and less travel in our ethanol situation. And then also, of course, we'll have risk in political change. We don't know what those are, but there may be things there that come about and increase prices or change the outlook. I always tell guys to know and understand their numbers, use price risk protection, lock in profits when available. I encourage people to look at conservation practices and see if they fit for their operation. Work on those top five items and try and lower them without lowering the output. Cash rents seem to stay fairly steady. If it's not working, I think guys need to maybe consider not paying that cash rent, see what it does for their individual operation and how that may turn out if they let that piece go. Capital purchases, I didn't have a chance to look at it, but I've heard through the radio that capital purchases are up this year. I think guys need to be cautious with that. I know it's optimistic time, but we need to also be cautious and still work to build back that operating capital. I think that's what I have for today. If we have questions, I can sure answer them. As always, the sun will come up and it'll be a bright day, and look forward to the future.
Anyone have a
There's
question
my contact.
they want to throw out to Jack? Well, Jack, I don't have any questions in the chat box or anything, so there's your contact information. If you guys need to get a hold of Jack, please do so via any of those methods.
Yep.
And Dr. Daly, I will turn it over to you.
All right, thanks. Okay, is that showing up, Heather?
Yes, it is.
All right, if you don't mind, I'm not gonna turn on my camera. About a minute and a half ago, I started a nosebleed here. So as a veterinarian, I'm used to having blood around, but I realize that most people probably aren't. So I'm just gonna go like this. So I really appreciate Heather letting me come on your Ag Dialogues for this month. Kind of talk about a animal health issue that has some economic issue implications for sure, I think. So we'll just get into this. What I'm going to be talking about today is beef cow death loss and an effort that some of us in Extension are undertaking to understand these things a little better. So I'm always amazed at the number of calls I get from producers and veterinarians who oftentimes have found a lot of cows, or what I think are a lot of cows, and just dead on pasture for no particular reason. The reason for them calling is usually to try to ask if there's anything going around or if there's anything they should be concerned about. And it kind of amazes me the nonchalance sometimes of producers accepting death losses in their cow herd. I can't imagine, the financial hit that really takes to a beef cow herd when a otherwise productive cow is found suddenly dead. You've lost the potential for a calf that year. You've lost all the opportunity costs that you put into that cow through the year with feed and other inputs, and you have nothing to show for them at the end. And if you want to keep your herd up in numbers, you have to replace that animal. So, we're definitely talking about a financial issue here when we're talking about this topic. One of the things that's interesting when we deal with beef cows, different than a lot of species, is that those physiologic demands on their bodies and their nutrient sources, what we feed these animals, really changes throughout the year. And so this is much different than a swine herd that, what we see in that finisher barn, for example, in January is pretty much the same as what we see in July. There aren't any changes throughout the year. And you could say the same thing for dairy herds too. And for the way we raise beef cows, these issues can be much more challenging to diagnose sometimes because we're oftentimes out on far-flung pastures. There's that mentality that, once we turn those cows out to summer pasture, that, it's kind of a vacation for us now. We don't have to worry about them so much. We don't have to feed those animals. But so they don't get that level of scrutiny that we get sometimes from having those animals closer around. So I was not alone in getting these calls. Several of us with the livestock portion of SDSU Extension share that kind of frustration getting those calls and not having good answers about what's going on. And we've teamed with some veterinarians across the state to actually put together an information gathering effort. This is in the form of a survey. The link is right there. Anyone can go on this website and fill out a short survey. It's usually taking people between 5 and 10 minutes. If there is a death loss instance in a herd, a veterinarian could go on this and enter information for their client. An allied industry person could do this for a client, or most definitely producers could get on this themselves and enter information. So what we're really just looking for is some general information about how many cows were lost. Was it summer pasture? Were there supplemental feed being given to the cows? What's the sources of water? What gestation and age of these cows? Because we just don't have that source of baseline information about a lot of these death losses. We'll, I really encourage you to go on this this website. If you are someone who has lost cows, or if you know somebody or work with, please tell them about this, because the more information we get, the better we'll be able to kind of help producers understand these things in the future. So I mentioned the seasonality of things with cow death loss, and they're very pronounced. You know, in winter we have feeding issues. We have the cold winter weather that plays into this as well. Spring, with the onset of grass growth, would be where we see issues like grass tetany that would affect cows out on that rapidly growing pasture. Summer and fall, we have the potential for plant and water toxicities because of the hotter weather. And so what kills a cow, or what results in cow death loss in winter, a lot of times can be very different than what would happen in the summer. So to just give you some example of some of these issues that we're looking at, in winter time, this time of year, some winters we have very harsh conditions with cold temperatures, precipitation events. This year we've been very lucky that the temperatures have been mild, and we haven't had a lot of real nasty blizzards and snowstorms. But some years we do. And when the temperature drops in November and doesn't really reach above freezing until March, we have the situation where cows are using a lot of their energy just to maintain their own body temperature. Couple that with the fact that in most cow herds in this part of the world, those cows are gestating a fetus that is rapidly growing. So if we're going to be calving in March or April, January to March, we've got a pretty big fetus that's having some pretty big nutritional demands on that body as well. So if we don't really pay attention to what's going on, we do know that this can be a source of cow death loss. So here's a graph that looks at the energy requirements for a cow based on the months after calving. So you could look at this here as maybe being April, and this maybe being March if we were having an April calving cow herd, and we can shift that according to how the individual herds run their calving season. But just looking at these, this increase in the energy requirements for a normal cow, are really rapidly increasing in this time frame, almost to the point where they're almost as high as the demands placed on that cow when she's milking heavily in feeding that calf. So in this part of the world, this time of year is something we need to pay attention to. So the body condition loss in that third trimester, very problematic. We want those cows to be in good shape going into calving for purposes of not having calving problems, one, and then two, to make sure that they're able to produce colostrum and milk for those calves. And so in harsher times of harsher years, it's not uncommon for us to run into these issues in some herds. And what we find is that these are oftentimes down cows that are just too weak to rise. These animals don't show any other illnesses that are apparent. They're alert, and if you put feed in front of them, they'll usually be able to eat. And when we do postmortems on these animals, we'll find that they don't have much in their rumen. They have a large fetus that's drawing down on their energy requirements and depleted fat stores. They're putting all of their energy and their reserves into that fetus. And a lot of times these situations will be, in winter range situations like you see in this picture here, where there's not much there to for the animals to eat. Maybe there's a little bit of supplemental feed put out there. Maybe there's some lick tubs. Or we have a situation where maybe even these cows are in a dry lot or in up near the buildings, but and fed what should be an adequate diet, but the bigger cows are pushing out the younger, smaller cows, or the older, smaller cows, weaker cows, and that we have differential intake of energy even in herds where these nutritional needs are being met. So oftentimes, this will be a situation where we'll see cows out on pasture that are maybe kind of laying with their back down a hill, and we say, well, they just didn't get up, and they just got kind of caught with their feet uphill and bloated and couldn't died because of that. And then we have this cow here is an example of a cow that just wandered into the pond a little too close to the mud, got stuck in the mud, and exerted herself to the point where she was basically exhausted just because she didn't have the energy to really navigate that tricky situation. So these kind of things are tip-offs that there's something going on here. I mean, normal cows should be able to stand up after they lie down. Normal cows shouldn't get stuck in a little bit of mud. So those are tip-offs. And here I've listed some of the things that our beef cow nutritionists will say in late gestation, those last 3 months of gestation for the cows. We need to have these kind of requirements for our animals. And then I've got some examples of here of how those needs could be met, either through range cake, distiller's grain, even some soybean meal and corn, and corn by itself. What we have to remember is that energy by itself is not it's not efficient enough to just provide energy by itself. We also need to have adequate protein intake as well. In springtime, I mentioned that when we have the onset of lush green grass, that's usually pretty good nutrition-wise for these cows. But we do have situations where the rapid growth of these grasses will result in low magnesium in the pastured grasses. This can result in what we call grass tetany. That's the hypomagnesemia is the technical term for grass tetany. Hypocalcemia is the technical term for milk fever. And so usually we see this happen in heavy milking cows, in older cows, that we see these issues. And so these are things that need to be kind of looked out for. And as we've developed cows that raise good growthy calves, we've had a tendency to select for cows that lactate quite a bit too, and that places a demand on their system for magnesium and calcium as well. So even though we'll see the tetany and the seizure-like activity of that cow laying down on pasture, a lot of times what we see is those cows will just be found dead. It can progress fairly rapidly in these cows. So it's a result of the plant tissue just being very low in magnesium, especially in high potassium can exacerbate this. Rapidly growing grasses in cool temperatures are springtime in South Dakota. That's the risk time for this. Treatment, if we can get to these cows, usually is fairly effective, giving intravenous solutions for calcium and magnesium, but prevention is always going to be better, and we want to make sure that our producers are putting out supplemental magnesium in the mineral during these times of year. And I should also mention that we do get these cases popping up in the fall sometimes too, when we have rapid regrowth of pasture grasses too. So it's not necessarily just a springtime thing, although that's when we see most of the problems. Summertime plant toxicities, depending on the weather conditions and the actual forages and feedstuffs being presented to the animals. Nitrates that are when feedstuffs are high in nitrates, this creates a situation where there's decreased oxygen available to the cells of the body. So we'll see animals in labored breathing. Oftentimes this will be a situation where we don't see these signs either, and we'll just find these animals dead. This can also affect reproduction, and we can cause high nitrates in feedstuffs can cause abortions if they don't cause the outward clinical signs in in animals. So many feedstuffs are potentially ones that can accumulate nitrates. And when we see this is in heavily fertilized pastures, in using nitrogen fertilizers, or probably more often we associate nitrates in these feedstuffs with drought conditions, stress on that plant and damage to that plant that's accumulating nitrates in the plant tissue. There's a wide variety of other things, and just listing some of the other possibilities where we might find cows dead on pastures. Prussic acid poisoning if we're grazing sorghum and sorghum-related forages. Blue-green algae is something that we do see pop up in late summer, in the heat of the summer, in dams and ponds, stagnant waters. We also see a lot of animals that we post having accumulations of net wrap in their rumens and their stomachs, and that's can be associated not just with death loss, but also some poor performance as well. We see hardware issues when tire feeders are used, and we do see some infectious diseases once in a while. Anthrax is something that's endemic in central South Dakota, and we'll see that once in a while. Most of our producers will vaccinate against those issues. And well, in these things and the other things that I've mentioned already, not always very straightforward to diagnose, even when veterinarians do get a chance to go out and perform a postmortem on those animals. So that's one of the reasons why we would encourage people to get on to this survey, and make your producers and people you work with aware that we're just trying to get some information about these problems out on, particularly out on pastures, but also dry lots and around and after the time of calving as well. So really encourage people to get on there. This isn't meant to be like a flow chart that you put in your information and it spits out what the probable cause was for the death loss, but it's like a first step. It's a first step for us to kind of understand, you know, are we seeing more problems on pasture? Are we seeing more problems in dry lot? Are there specific feedstuffs or weeds or something that are associated with some of these death losses? So that's where we're at with this effort. So I'd be happy to take any questions right now. And I appreciate Heather and the organizers for letting me come on and talk about a kind of a topic a little peripheral to economics, but something that does certainly affect the economics of cow-calf herds.
So we do have one question for you, Russ, that came in. Is Johne's prevalent in South Dakota?
Johne's disease. I wouldn't say it's prevalent, but it's there. It is something that we're increasingly seeing in cow-calf herds, beef herds. It's been something that's been established in dairy herds for a long time. And what we do see is not very many cows affected within herds. So it's not something that you would see an outbreak of. It's a really long, long incubation period disease. So it's usually older cows that are affected, and so we don't see a great number of them affected in any one year. It's something that we typically don't see sudden deaths with, but we will see cows with clinical signs of diarrhea and just wasting away. And what's problematic is that young calves and younger animals that are exposed to those clinical animals can get the infection kind of set up in their system, only to succumb to it when they get older as well. So for those reasons, it's really kind of tough to get a handle on in a lot of our beef herds, but it is something that people and producers are becoming a lot more aware of, that's for sure.
Thank you very much. Anyone else have a question that they would like to ask? If there's no additional questions, I think we'll thank Russ for participating today. We greatly appreciate that. like you mentioned, death loss is a huge economic factor for the cow-calf producer. So having that one or two cows randomly die is kind of an important thing to understand or figure out where it's coming from or what caused it so we can prevent that. So I believe Dr. Daly's information to contact him was provided in earlier slides. If it wasn't and you do have a question later, please send me an email and I will forward that on to him if you can't find that at this time or when you need it. So with that, I think I will kick off the last 15 minutes here and share my presentation with you. Okay, so what we are going to cover just a little bit today are some of the numbers that you hear in the news, and so that you can see it kind of in a graphical form of the information that's being put out by any association or organization or press releases, wherever you might find this information. We're just going to look kind of at what the beef production and pork production looks like, kind of a total red meat and poultry production to wrap up the presentation a little bit. I've got a lot of slides to get through, so we're not going to really target in or hone or make predictions or anecdotal comments about why the picture is the way it is. My goal with this was to provide you with an idea of when you hear prices are up or production is up or down or sideways, what that looks like compared to normal. Because as we think about 2020, it really was that year. We started the year, our weather was pretty crazy. We came in off of a wet fall. We had a wet spring. We've had prevent plant issues and concerns that we talked about on this program early this spring. We had a lot of those issues and concerns that we were talking about. And then we switched gears and the weather really changed across the state. And it was really kind of drastic in several parts of the state where we had issues with drought concerns and whether we were going to get crops. We had an early harvest this year compared to the way late and wet crops that we had last year. So we also had, and you see that the next three bullets include the markets. We had some price concerns early going on, trying to tie in a profit if we could get a price that would be above or at break even. Then we had some slaughter disruption on the livestock side when the COVID pandemic came in and we had plants that actually shut down and then when they opened, were at way reduced capacity for a while. So that price disruption and the craziness that came with the price drops and the rapid price drops, followed by some pretty rapid recovery in some of our commodity crops that we've talked about and looked at. Continue with the pandemic. Jack talked a lot about some of the issues facing, with the pandemic, with our health and our family concerns, with the vaccine coming out. And then we had many policies come out throughout the year. And because the ag industry doesn't have enough acronyms already, we added the CARES Act, the CFP, the PPP, and the EIDL to the whole conversation. So adding those different programs in to the whole mix, there was a lot of craziness going on out in the industry. So I just want to look at some of the changes, how the changes affected total production, so that you have a picture of what some of those things were. So to kick things off, we're kind of going to look at beef production. So this is the federally inspected numbers throughout the year on a weekly basis. You can see when plants shut down for cleaning and when they ramped back up, and then when they went back to pretty much full scale production. And you can see, we started the year running pretty high. We were above our 2019 averages and above the 5-year average. We had our huge drop, but then we kind of have come back into that at or above our production levels from 2019 on the beef cattle side. If we look at it on a quarterly basis, we can see where our average 2015 and 19 numbers are in this bright red bar. The next bar is 2020. And then we have some expectations looking out, forecasting for 21 and 22. What does that production look like? Excuse me, for the next years coming up on a per quarter basis. So we can see the April to June for 2020, this is really where we had plant closures and it greatly affected our quarterly beef production at that point. Looks like maybe a dual slide kind of representing something similar to the pounds of beef earlier, but here's the cattle slaughter numbers. So we're slaughtering at that 660 some thousand head of cattle at this point. Total cow slaughter, if we want to think about herd expansion or contraction, we look at cow slaughter numbers, and you can see where they're kind of following, trending at or near that 2019 average, but still above the 2014 to 2018 average as we go through there. One thing of interest to a lot of feeders, we had plants shut down. So what did that do to our dressed weights? And it pretty much did what you would expect. You know, if we keep cattle on feed a little bit longer, they're going to get a little bit bigger. And they did. Both steers and heifers are represented in this dress weight, as well as slaughter cows. So we did have a pretty, an increase in slaughter weights per animal that was going through our slaughter facilities. And then those of you that are into the meat side, we see a pretty nice jump in the increase of the percent of animals that graded choice due to that extra time on feed as well. So the extra time on feed moved us up into that 73.5 or somewhere percent high for the summer months, when we traditionally don't necessarily have, we've got these peaks down here at 71% of the cattle marketing grading choice or better. And we're kind of continuing above our average trend as we move those cattle through the slaughter facilities. Beef and veal exports, running this line here is about that 3 billion pounds of beef and veal that is exported. For 2020, we are just below that 3 billion pounds with expectations that in 21 and 2, we'll be back up to the, in that 3 billion pounds area. Coming off of the 2018 high, but well above some of these earlier 2000 numbers that we've been looking at. In the case of imports, again, here's our 3 billion pound number. 2020, we did have a little bump of increase there, not all the way to 3.5 billion pounds, but it is a little bit higher than where we had been trending through the late 2015 to 2020 timeline there. Expectation is 21, we will drop back below that trend line of $3 billion and right in that area for 22. So if we think about the net of those imports, so here's our 2020 number. So we are net a little bit more imports than we exported this year. Pretty much we've been averaging about 0 if you put all these numbers together. So imports and exports have kind of canceled each other out if we look at it on a total pound evaluation process. I pulled in just a couple of the different individual product prices and where different prices were for those end products. Just some of them had some funny blurps in them back and forth to look at and talk about. This is the wholesale ribeye price. You can see when we had that slaughter disruption through April, May, June, beef ribeye prices really had a pretty good jump. Then they kind of came back to normal. And right now, hopefully you have your Christmas ribeye prime rib already purchased, because prices are pretty much at their peak and some record highs there. So just an interesting component of that ribeye price point at this time. Strip loins, the loin prices haven't really followed that. So it's kind of a ribeye thing. So maybe switch out your Christmas prime rib for a Christmas strip loin steak instead. You'd probably be all right that way too. And then if we look at 90% lean on a weekly basis, it did have its peak as well during the disruption, and now is actually dropped and is below, well below our 2019 prices that we saw just a year ago, and below that 5-year average from 14 through 18. Here's just a chart that kind of compares where we're at year over year, looks at it in a percentage basis instead of just strictly numbers. So you can see our production in this blue spot here. Then we look at imports, and we did have a rise that was a 13% increase over a year ago, but expectations for 2020 is a 15% decline from the 2020 numbers. So putting us pretty much back to, we're below our 2019 imports is what was being forecast there. A look at exports kind of puts us in that very similar category, 2021 to the 19 numbers as we look at that. And one thing that I didn't have as an individual chart is capita per consumption per capita. And we can see that we did have a bit of an increase for this year, looking at a decline expected for 2021. So if we're looking at similar production numbers, similar import numbers, we might still have a carryover of beef product due to a decrease in per capita consumption. A quick slide on dairy slaughter. We know dairy is a huge component of agriculture in South Dakota, and those dairy cow numbers play into our beef availability for going into ground product and those types of things. You can see the our numbers for 2020 are at or below the 5-year average for most of the months or the weeks listed here. So there has been a reduction in 2019 across the dairy cow slaughter numbers. Milk production was not affected by the shutdowns and the COVID responses as much as other commodities were hit. It does show that decrease a little bit there in that April, May, June timeline, but pretty much for 2020, milk production across the United States has been above year ago numbers and the 5-year running average there. So if we move into hogs and pork and look at hog slaughter, this is the weekly slaughter numbers, again, kind of starting where we started with the beef cattle numbers. We can see that big decline when big packing plants all shut down at the same time, that slow revamp up through these weeks here, and now kind of trending at our normal kill capacity. Had some increases late summer there, and now we're trending pretty close to average with our 2019 numbers. Again, we can see that increased in dress weight of the hogs running through the slaughter facilities, similar to what we saw with the beef numbers there. That seems like an obvious situation. If we have to hold the animals longer, we're going to have more weight going in through the slaughter facilities. And so this shows that pork production increase or change based on the animals going through and heavier animals going through. We had our plant shutdowns and the increases in pork production due to the combined increase in numbers running through and the increased pounds of animals. You can see each one of these little dips and correlate it to 4th of July, Labor Day. This would be Veterans Day when facilities are shut down or have reduced capacity for those federal holidays. Again, if we look at it on a quarterly basis, we can look and see the red line is our average from 2015 to 2019, And then we look at what our 2020 numbers are and the forecast 21 and 22. So quite a bit of increase in pork production coming in the forecasted 21 and 22 numbers as we move forward. Pork cutout values has kind of been on its own roller coaster. Lots of price variation. We had the price reduction and then a pretty big rally following the shutdown of plants, and then another drop in the price system. So that followed a seasonal, if 2019 alone can be a seasonal trend. However, historically, that's not when prices traditionally drop for the hog markets. That's usually one of their high points of the year. So getting that whole hog process, everything backfilled, everything running at full capacity again, took a pretty good hit on the hog industry from a price standpoint that way. And then you can see the baseline slaughter hogs, the weighted average carcass price as we move forward, now kind of recovering as we get into the end of 2020. So hopefully we can at least keep those average type of prices moving back and forth for our producers there. If we look at pork exports, the pork export market has been on a pretty steep incline, with 21 and 22 expected to be a little bit higher than this year, which had a pretty healthy increase from its 2019 years. So good pork export demand. And conversely, if we look at our imports of pork based on carcass weights, you know, this is a pretty big decrease and a downward trend in the import side of things. So if we look at net exports, this is kind of not the same slide that we saw at all when we looked at the beef net import market, because this one is net exports almost of 7 billion pounds. So a pretty healthy export market compared to import market and the pork side. Again, if we just pick some of the pork products and look at what their prices are, we had a pretty good decrease in 2020 of ham prices throughout the spring and summer months, and kind of a rally back to more traditional or quote normal, I guess, prices headed out into the last couple of months there. Again, similar situation with pork loin prices. So they're kind of back in that normal category for their price points headed out into the end of the year here. And pork trimmings actually rallied a little higher, and they're trending above average for that 72% lean pork trimming prices, pork prices. So again, if we just compare them, we can see kind of that increasing trend in production. 2019 was about 5% higher than a year before it. 2020 is 3.1% higher than last year. And 21 is expected to be another 2.2% higher than it was this year. Imports on that declining scale, we saw that, and this is percent from a year-over-year evaluation, so compare them back and forth that way. Little bit of an increase in our 21 export expectations, with that big 17.4% increase over last year in our export markets. Again, showing the consumption on a per capita basis. Pork is holding a lot more steady in that in the pounds being consumed on a per capita basis. So a little bit of a decrease this year, get about half of that back next year. So just some of the numbers related there to pork consumption and production. So if we look at the totals and we look at all red meat production based on a federally inspected component, we can see that those heavier animals have really, added to the market a little bit. We've got that increase running through late summer, and it's kind of an increase, but we're kind of back to normal here. So we did run some of those animals through and have put them back into, maybe we're getting towards more of a catch-up component and not having as many backlogged animals in the feedlots or finishing houses. On a quarterly basis, this is a total of red meat and poultry production. So we tie in one more of our competitors there, or one of the competitors in the meat markets. And you can see that we're on a projection for some pretty big production numbers coming up in 21 and 22 when we compare them to our 2020 numbers and our 2019 production numbers. So lots of product around is kind of the long and short of what that tells me. And then if we kind of just look quick here, this is again comparing those import or the production and import export numbers with per capita consumption for broilers to tie in that number a little bit from that last slide. And you can see that, you know, there's been an increase in broiler production across the nation. There's been a declining slope in their import markets. They're exporting more of their production that's being produced domestically. And we're kind of going to look at 2021's number or actual pounds of consumption, pretty equal to our 2019 numbers. There's a little bit of increase there following a 1.6% increase this year over last. So that was kind of a pictorial view of where production has been, some of the effect on prices as we went through the year, but a lot of those topics are getting hit online in different forums. You'll hear them being talked about back and forth. So I wanted to make sure that you had, you know, some of the idea on where things were headed and what the pictures looked like on total pounds. So with that, if there's any questions, I will take those at this time. Otherwise, you can always feel free to give me a call, send me an email. I'd be happy to talk to you, you know, about any of the numbers or provide you with information to Jack or Russ's presentations as we wrap up today and the 2020 year. So I don't see any questions coming in at this time. I do want to say thank you for your support throughout 2020 and the Ag Economic Dialogues. We are planning on doing another round, scheduling them for January through June here coming up soon. So you can be able to get on the SDSU Extension webpage and register for them at any time once I get them all loaded and ready for you. So unless you have any wrap-up comments or anything, Jack?
I don't have anything. I suppose we should say Merry Christmas and Happy New Year, though. We should say that to everyone.
All right.
Enjoy the holidays and safely, the best that you can.
With that, I'm going to echo Jack's comments on Merry Christmas, Happy 2021. Be safe and take care of yourself. We will look forward to seeing you again in January. Thank you very much.